Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. That was a little bit of a slow response. It is the second day of the conference. I was thrilled to join you at the award ceremony last night. I flew in from Singapore yesterday morning, first up to Auckland, then down to Wellington, so I was a little woolly. By about 10:45, I left. I noticed that no one else had left at 10:45 last night, so I'm imagining many of you kept going for a while, which means slow response in the beginning. So let me tell you a story about the most intimidating audience that I ever faced in my life, and then I will say good morning again to you. So this was about 2 years ago in Singapore. I've got 4 children. You will meet them as we go through the presentation today, not live on stage. This isn't that BBC moment. You'll see pictures of a few of them as we go through the discussion. My oldest is a 12-year-old boy. When he was in grade 4, they had a unit on innovation. So he gamely suggested to his teacher that Dad should come and present to his class. 290 grade 4 students. I don't know if you've ever presented to 10-year-olds before, but they are incredibly intimidating. They're smart enough so they know what you're talking about. They ask incredibly incisive questions like, are you famous? Have you written any books? Yes, I have. Has anyone purchased those books? A few people have. As many as have purchased Harry Potter? No, nowhere close to that much. But of course, they don't know the language of business. So when you're communicating concepts to them, you have to be really choiceful about some of the words that you use to describe what can be very complicated topics. Some of the things I learned from that presentation I will share not now, but in the concurrent session I'll be running later this morning. By far, the most rewarding part of the discussion, however, happened when I came on stage. I'm there in Reagan Theater. It is an American-themed school in Singapore. I'm staring at 290 bright faces. I come up on stage. I say good morning. And in unison, 290 voices respond, good morning, Mr. Anthony. So let me see how trainable you are as an audience. Good morning. Very good, very good. You do even better than the people in Singapore, which is impressive. So what I'm going to talk about over the course of the next 50 minutes or so, and I'll have a little activity in the middle of this, we'll have time for Q&A to make it a discussion and so on, is strategy through uncertainty, how to turn today's ambiguity into tomorrow's opportunity. And the way I want to frame up this discussion is to start with this quote from the French philosopher Paul Valéry, who in the 1930s said this: the trouble with our times is that the future is not what it used to be. And those words rang true then, but I think ring even more true today. As I was getting ready for the discussion, I reflected a little bit on what life was like when I was the age of my oldest boy, Charlie. I was a big video game player when I was around Charlie's age, and this is how the world has changed. This game, Tecmo Bowl, came out in 1989. I was 14 years old when it came out. I was born in 1975. This is cutting edge in 1989. This is what I was doing when I wasn't outside playing sport and doing other things. I was being Bo Jackson in Tecmo Bowl. If you're from America, you would get this reference. It's a very iconic video game. Bo Jackson was totally unstoppable in this game. And of course, this is what video games look like today. Photorealism, it's like you are participating in the sport. So I was talking to Charlie as I was getting ready for this, and Charlie is a very active boy. He's 12 years old. His favorite sport by far is baseball. He plays baseball in Singapore, which means that we travel a fair amount for sport because there are only 2 teams in Singapore. So if you want to play real games, you got to go to Manila or to Bangkok or down to Perth or whatever. That's what baseball is like in Singapore. He does tennis, he does Aikido, active boy. So I said, just name me some athletes. Who are some athletes that you know? So he started with American baseball players. He talked about Mookie Betts, who plays for the Boston Red Sox, his favorite team. He talked about Mike Trout. He then went on to some basketball players. He talked about LeBron James. He has a bunch of friends that are international football fans, so he talked about some football players. And then he said Ninja. I said, Ninja? Who is Ninja? And then he took me to the computer, and we went to Twitch, and we looked at Ninja, who is a Fortnite player. And this is from the mouth of babes. I know you talked about esports yesterday. I didn't prompt Charlie to say this, but Ninja is on the list of the athletes that he named. You can see here on the Twitch live screen, this is a random afternoon, Singapore time. There's 85,000 people watching Ninja. 176 million cumulative views. The world changes. It always does. There's a bunch of stuff going on in your world and in the world more broadly. One of the things that we've been tracking over time is the lifespan of companies in the Standard & Poor's 500 index. Here's the chart that shows the results of our latest research. The horizontal axis shows the years. The yellow bars are past data. The red bars are future projections. The vertical axis shows the lifespan of companies in years. What do you notice about this chart? So you see cycles in it. You see that it's going up and down. If you drew a trend line through it, what direction would it go? It would go down. Now this chart starts in 1965. There actually is data from the 1940s. It's a slightly different set, so the people who are very maniacal about this won't let me show the data further back. But you go back there, it's about 60 or 70 years. It's down to about 15 years today, and our projections show the number is going to bottom out at about 10 years. And if this continues to hold, it means that 50% of the companies on today's Standard & Poor's 500 index, 50% of them will not be on that index in 10 years. What will happen to them? Some will be overtaken by more quickly growing rivals. Some will be swallowed up and acquired by those rivals. Many of them will disappear, will go bankrupt. Who will replace them? Well, we know the names of some of these companies today, but many more of them are companies that don't yet exist, that will go through the entire life cycle of birth, ascendancy, and decline over the course of the next 10 or 15 years. This is the world that executives all around the world, in every industry, in every sector, have to grapple with. The only thing that we can be confident about is that the world is changing. And the challenge we have is the tools that were built for era of certainty and predictability aren't helpful as we start to go to a new world. Old maps indeed get you lost. If you try to make decisions based on data, I studied economics, I got an MBA degree, I was taught to make decisions based on data, but that consigns you to make decisions about the past because that's the only place that has perfect data. We know that disruptive changes don't come squarely at us from the middle of the market. They start at the fringes, at the edges of the market. The winning business models, the approaches that work, they aren't always evident from day one. When Google launched, everyone yawned because it wasn't the first, second, fifth, or even 10th search engine. It was the 18th venture capital-backed search engine. It wasn't clear at the beginning that it was going to be the one who broke through. And the reason why it broke through is not because Google was a great technology company, it was, but because it figured out the business model that paired its search terms with advertisements, which has made Google what it is today. That wasn't evident on day one, it emerged through trial and error experimentation. All of this means the things or companies or organizations or trends that you have to worry about. I'm sorry, I walked right into the middle of your picture. You're all ready to click and you got me instead. I do like to wander. I apologize for that. I'll try and pause a few times and have dramatic poses for those of you who want to take pictures. Most of you want this, not me, so I understand that. But it means the things you have to worry about are different than the things that you worry about today. Think about the automotive industry for a second. If you go back 5 years ago and you ask an executive from GM, who do you worry about? They would say, we worry about Ford, or we worry about Daimler, or we worry about Toyota. You ask Toyota executives that question, they would say the same thing. You ask them today who they worry about, what do they say? Who do automotive manufacturers worry about today? So I heard a bunch of different things. I heard Tesla. They actually don't worry that much about Tesla because Tesla is showing how hard it is to actually manufacture at scale. The large manufacturers know how to do that. They're going to figure out how to do electrification, so Tesla doesn't really bother them. I heard Google. They worry a lot about Google. I heard Apple. They worry a lot about Apple. They worry about, depending on the market that you're in, Uber or Grab or Ola or Gojek, the people who are commoditizing the car through ride-sharing services. These are not the answers they would have given 5 years ago. And 5 years from now, it's very likely to be a different set indeed. So we need new rules. We need new tools to make decisions as we face today's uncertainty. So what I'm going to try to do now is go through 4 principles that we have about setting and following a strategic direction through uncertainty. And I'll illustrate these with some case studies. I'll give you some examples. I'll give you a chance to apply it yourselves in a couple of places. So principle 1, Live present forward, but think future back. We have no choice but to live our lives present forward. That is just the way the universe works. But whenever we're thinking about strategy, whenever we're thinking about setting a course through uncertainty, we don't want to start with today, we want to start with tomorrow. So let me give you a chance to practice with this idea for a second, to embrace what we call future back thinking. I want you to talk at your table for no more than 2 minutes about what you are currently carrying that will be an anachronism in 2030. Something that people will say, I can't believe you had that. So I've illustrated this with a picture of car keys. These are almost gone in many markets anyway. But by 2030, the idea that we will be carrying around physical keys to open cars in a world where we're likely to have autonomous vehicles is pretty laughable. So 2 minutes. Talk about what you have with you today that will be an anachronism tomorrow. All right, let's get a couple voices from the audience. I can see you're excited about 2030, but let's turn now our attention back to the full group. Tomorrow's anachronisms today. This is a small crowd dive. Sorry for the videotape. I'll go back on stage soon. Who's got a good one? Oh, come on. You were all talking so excitedly. So, Marty, you've got one here. Paper. So the old line goes, we will have the paperless office as soon as we have the paperless bathroom, but perhaps paper will be gone in future conferences because we'll be able to write on digital forms. So we won't write, we'll have things that are recording, live streaming, transcribing for us, so we don't have to take physical notes. That's certainly something one could imagine by 2030. What else? Credit cards, plastic, they're already beginning to disappear. Glasses, I don't know. We've had laser eye surgery for a long time, but I ask my daughter all the time, my 10-year-old girl, should I get laser eye surgery? She said, you would look very weird if you didn't wear glasses, so there we go. But pen, physical writing instruments, credit cards, the idea of plastic to do transactions. You go to China now, and almost everything is done through your mobile phone. If you're not on the WeChat or Alipay platform, it's very hard to get around in Shanghai. Beggars even accept payment using the WeChat platform. And this is reality through a QR code. What else? Cash. So similarly, the idea that we will have paper or plastic or whatever is in our currency these days, that we'll be carrying that around in 2030 in a world where we will continue to have mobile devices that continue to upgrade. We will have the blockchain / Bitcoin continue to grow. Cash is, I think, quite likely to be an anachronism in many markets. What else? I had a Singapore audience once where I did this, where they said sex would be an anachronism in 2030, which is a very strange response in Singapore, but there you go.
We felt conferences are going to be doing virtual reality conferences. We don't feel
Yeah, so I get this one a fair amount too. And those of you who saw the video yesterday know that I spend a fair amount of my life on airplanes. This is what happens when you live in Singapore and your organization is headquartered in the United States. I do average about 300,000 miles a year in the air. And of course, by 2030, the ability to have good holography or really good interactive experiences through augmented or virtual reality, I think there will still be huge value in the physical, but there'll be less of it. I think much more of it will be virtual. Anything else that we didn't talk about? Those are the ones I usually hear. I usually hear things related to writing, things related to payment, things related to experiences. Those are the big ones that come up. Anything else that people had in the room that they want to share?
Old knees.
Old knees. Old knees, yes. Well, you know, it's interesting. I saved that reference. I'll come back to it in just a second. This is the first thing that we've got to do. We have to be good at having this type of thinking, where we don't think of the reality as it exists today. We think about what tomorrow will look like. As leaders, we have to improve our ability to experience tomorrow today. How do you do that? You say that's impossible because we can only experience today. Well, remember the guidance from the great science fiction writer William Gibson, wrote the Neuromancer trilogy, a range of other books. He once said, the future has already arrived, it's just not very evenly distributed. We can find tomorrow today if we look in the right places. What shows you tomorrow today? Where do you go to look if you want to see what the future will look like? Children, absolutely. So my 4 children are an endless source of inspiration to me. I talked about Charlie, my 12-year-old boy. Here's my 10-year-old girl, Holly. Holly teaches me a lot every day, but the thing where she's been indispensable source of advice for me is giving me guidance as I think about how I can be a good board advisor to MediaCorp. MediaCorp is kind of like the ABC or BBC done at Singapore size. And the dominant thing that MediaCorp does is produce and distribute video content through linear television channels. I watch the way that Holly and her friends consume media, and I know that model is dying because Holly will never sit and watch a linear television program. She won't go and flip through channels or anything like that. You will often see her going through Netflix and watching the shows she wants to watch when she wants to watch them. Or you typically will see her in a pose like this. She's getting ready to watch her favorite YouTuber, Dan TDM. Anyone here have kids that watch Dan TDM? Or anyone on their own watch Dan TDM? You don't have to raise your hands for that one. So I saw a hand here. What does Dan TDM do? You're not sure, but there's a lot of him. Anyone know what Dan TDM narrates? Minecraft, that's right. He narrates himself playing games of Minecraft. Now, I find this utterly bizarre. When I was growing up, I showed you Tecmo Bowl. I played plenty of video games, but watching people narrate video games seems very strange to me. But Holly will watch for hours, and she is not alone. Dan TDM has 20 million followers on YouTube. Reliable press accounts say that he made 20 million British pounds in endorsements last year. This is the future of media, and watching the way that Holly consumes it allows me to give better guidance to MediaCorp. So spend time with children. Go and look at what startups are doing. See what's happening inside university labs. Look at what the hackers and the artists are doing. This is me on stage in a conference in Melbourne last year with a cyborg. This is the cyborg right here, Neil Harbison. Neil Harbison has a brain implant. The brain implant comes out of his head. It allows him to increase his perception of the spectrum. There's an IP address in that brain implant. You can email him a picture, and he can perceive that picture. I was talking to one of his fellow cyborgs at the conference. This cyborg had a plate in the back of his head with wires going to his ear. I said, "Isn't it hard to sleep at night?" He said, "Yeah, I don't sleep very well." I said, "Well, you must get some benefit from that. What's the benefit?" He says, "Well, I can sense changes in atmospheric pressure." I said, "Okay, what does that let you do?" He says, "Well, I know when it's raining outside." I said, "Well, I just look out the window and I know whether it's raining outside, and I sleep pretty well at night." And we laugh at these things. But what is fringe today becomes mainstream tomorrow. When I first saw Neil Harbison, actually at a different conference, he was being interviewed by a BBC journalist, and there was a poll question of the audience. How many of you would have this kind of modification to your body? And of course, you first hear it sounds weird, so everyone says no. And then he says, well, how many of you have a knee replacement or a hip replacement or have had cosmetic dentistry or have had some other physical thing done to your body? And about a third of the hands in the room go up. So again, the future's already arrived. It's just not very evenly distributed. As leaders, we need to make a regular practice, not just about spending time with the people that we consider today's core, the people who are consuming or using the services that we provide, the people who love the things that we do. But we need to spend time at the fringes, at the edges, at the periphery, so we can see tomorrow today. Principle 2, create data-informed stories, not data-driven reports. When we think about setting a future direction and we think about creating a strategy, we often think that the end product is a really long, very thorough, very detailed document. That document will have facts and figures and slides and spreadsheets. Then we have to confront the brutal reality of the world. There was an article in the MIT Sloan Management Review earlier this year that had a stunning statistic in it. It said that if you ask the C-level leaders, the very top leaders in a company, to name their top strategic priorities, less than half of them can recite the top 3 priorities of their organization, less than half. The reason why is because we're approaching strategy in the wrong way. We are creating data-driven, fact-based dialogues rather than data-informed stories. We need to think about the story of the future. Let's practice. Imagine that you arrived at a cocktail party in 2030. You've shown up in your driverless vehicle. You now are going to mingle with people in the cocktail party. It is a physical party. This is not augmented reality or virtual reality. how would you introduce yourself in a sentence in 2030? Go and find somebody that you haven't met in the conference and go and introduce yourself. Imagine the cocktail party of the future. Go and make your introduction. What does your world look like in 2030? You're now supposed to talk to each other, not look at me. And you can get up and you can move around as long as you're back in your seats in 3 minutes. All right, the bar is closed. The cocktail party is coming to an end. I need a wolf whistler. Last call, last call, last call. So you can see up here the way I would introduce myself, at least I envision introducing myself. Today that I usually will say that I'm a consultant, sometimes I'll say that I'm an author. My introduction in 2030, I'm a teacher and strategic advisor. I teach at INSEAD, a global business school, and Insight University, and sit on several boards and advisory committees. Insight University, by the way, does not exist. So we'll talk more about that in just a second. Did you meet any interesting people at your 2030 cocktail party? Who was doing something interesting? Share, let's get a couple people to share. How about a hand? You don't have to, this is great because you don't have to volunteer yourself. You're volunteering somebody else. Who'd you meet at your future cocktail party? You all said yeah. Come on, let's get a couple or three. So you met an old retired guy who, I didn't hear the last part. Builds outdoor showers. Okay, there we go. I often will get people who say, and this is irrespective of the age of the audience. If I'm with 20-year-olds, if I'm with older than 20-year-olds, in 2030, everyone says they're retired. Everybody says that they're done working, and that's interesting. And this goes to the Gallup finding that only about 35% of people are actually engaged at their job. So anyway, so we get people who are retired and outdoor shower builders. Who else did you meet?
We felt that everyone would already know everything about you.
Everybody would. Interesting. So you wouldn't have to introduce yourself because, number one, there could be, just like there was at the royal wedding, we could use artificial intelligence to have facial scans and you would have information. Or we live lives publicly as it is now, and you're having a generation that grows up with truly everything documented. Or not necessarily documented, curated, and a particular view put forward. So by 2030, that could be even more ever-present. So we might not have to introduce ourselves at all. When people do this, it is very rare that they say, well, in 2030, I will be 55 years old. My net worth will be XX.YY dollars. I will live in a house that has square footage or square meterage of this amount. They don't go into the numbers. They tell a story. Yet again, when we do strategy, we focus on the numbers. We say we're going to have this many participants, our turnover will be this amount, whatever it is. We need to remember that living, breathing heart behind what we do. We need to tell a story of the future. The reason why people can't remember strategies is because they're boring, because they have too much data, too much numbers in it. We need to do things like Lowe's, a DIY chain in the United States did. It commissioned a science fiction writer and created a cartoon describing what its story of the future would look like. This is an organization we worked with in the Philippines, Manila Water. This is a stodgy, regulated utility that came up with a mock Harvard Business Review article to explain what its future would look like. Now, you're never going to get these things precisely right. This is why the metaphor we have here is of an impressionist painting. You don't know exactly what's going on here. You don't know exactly what year this is. But you know that you're in London. It looks kind of like it. You know roughly what time of day it is. And that's what you need. You need something that's in the future. At least 5 years is our guidance. It's a story. There are heroes in it. There are moments of crises, as there always are when you're trying to do something different. It's not just words. There are pictures and videos. And most critically, that story starts with why. It doesn't start with the financial result or the specific performance target you're going to hit. It starts with the reason why you are doing the things that you're doing. This is the most recent book that I wrote, Dual Transformation. I will give you the executive summary of that book in about 90 seconds. This book is our guide for what your story of the future ought to look like in times of disruption. The word transformation means a fundamental change in form or substance. This is not doing what you're currently doing a little better, faster, or cheaper. This is the organizational equivalent of a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. The word dual in the title suggests you're not doing one thing, you are doing two. The first part of the equation is what we call transformation A, repositioning what you are currently doing to make it more resilient in the face of the disruption you're facing. You're not going to a new context or a new market or redefining what you do, you're changing how you do it. The clearest global example of this is Netflix. How many of you subscribe to Netflix today? So that looks visually like more than half the room. You go back 10 years ago, that would have been impossible because Netflix's business model was shipping DVDs through the mail. I'm imagining none of you are getting DVDs shipped through the mail. I imagine you all are watching streaming content over the internet. Netflix hasn't redefined its market, but it has fundamentally changed how it delivers content and the content it delivers by moving from licensing other people's content to creating its own. That's transformation A. The second part of the transformation equation, not surprisingly, is what we call transformation B. This is where you go and do something different. You go and compete in a new context, in a new market, and so on. A clear global example of this is Amazon.com. 12 years ago, Amazon is an e-tailer. It has an internal problem. IT projects are taking too long. It commissions a team to go and address that problem. The team succeeds and trips across something that it thinks has far bigger potential. It makes the case that they ought to turn this into a commercial offering that would let people rent computing capacity on demand. Today we call this cloud computing. It's about 20 billion US dollars in turnover, more than 1 billion US dollars in net income. Completely different market that Netflix does in a different way. This is what we call dual transformation. The first example we have in the book is from Janssen. Janssen is the pharmaceutical arm of Johnson & Johnson. 10 years ago, its business was lagging. Sales were in decline. Its drugs were coming off patent, and it was facing a crisis of growth. It launched a dual transformation strategy. Transformation A, changing the way that it discovers drugs. Rather than just hiring research scientists and praying, it opened up its innovation process to work with startup companies and university scientists so it could find the best molecules wherever they might be in the world. By changing the way it discovered drugs, it took its R&D productivity from the lowest in the industry to the highest. That's transformation A. Now that's the way that it changed what it does today. What do you think transformation B would look like for a pharmaceutical company? Today, Janssen makes $30 billion a year selling pills that allow people to treat and manage diseases. What looks disruptive to that? Eradicate the disease. So they started a program called disease interception. The idea is, as we understand the human genome, as we have smart connected devices throwing off data about individuals, we can create the equivalent of a check engine light for a human being. So it can say something along the lines of, Scott, you think you're a healthy 43-year-old male, but the light's blinking. If you don't do something, we see diabetes in your future. And our answer for you isn't a pill, it is a program that can allow you to intercept that disease. Now you can imagine there's at least some force within J&J that hears something like that. J&J, Janssen is the pharmaceutical arm of it, and here's, wait a second, we make 30 billion US dollars a year selling pills to help people manage diseases. Why would we want to eradicate diseases? While that might be good for humanity, that's bad for our shareholders. Those discussions end quickly at J&J because they point to this. This is the credo etched into granite in J&J's headquarters that starts with this. Our first responsibility is the doctors, nurses, patients, mothers, fathers, all others who use our products and services. Our second responsibility is to the communities in which we operate. Our third responsibility is to our employees. Our fourth and final responsibility is to our shareholders, who, if we do all of these things, have the right to get a fair return. Shareholder value or the results are not primary, the purpose is primary. These are critical things as your organization is transforming. My co-author Clark Gilbert did this at a newspaper company as he was rejiggering his core newspaper operation and unfortunately having to let a lot of people go. He was guided by the purpose of his organization, trusted voices of light and truth reaching hundreds of millions of people worldwide. You get these kind of statements right, and the organization is almost instantly recognizable. Who is this? The Earth's most customer-centric company where you can find and discover anything you might want online. Who is that? Amazon. Who's this? Organize the world's information to make it accessible and useful. Google. The last example I will show here is from an organization in Singapore. This organization had a strange problem. Its customers kept coming back, and because its customers kept coming back, its employees were unhappy. What type of organization do you think this was? Say that, I didn't hear that. General director.
Funeral.
Oh, funeral director, funeral director, funeral director. No. The zombie apocalypse is not yet upon us. It's not a funeral director. Not heard that one before. What organization do you think this is? Hospital? No. Hospitals, there's a part of hospitals that don't like repeat visitors. There's a part where they feel like they're caring for chronic patients, so they feel balanced sometimes when they get repeat visitors. Prison. Prison is correct. So Singapore prison systems, high rates of recidivism, the guards were unhappy. So a new leader came in and did a range of things, including creating this statement of purpose. We aspire to be captains in the lives of offenders committed to our custody. We want them to be with us for as short a period of time and gone from us for as long a period of time. Today, it's got some of the lowest rates of recidivism in the world and some of the highest rates of job satisfaction. So your story of the future needs to start with why. Principle 3, the essence of strategy is choice. This is John F. Kennedy giving his probably most famous speech in 1961 to the joint session of the House of Representatives and the US Senate, where he commits to send a man to the moon and bring him back by the end of the decade. You need this in your strategy. The idea of letting hundreds or thousands of flowers bloom never works. You get a lot of dead and trampled flowers. Johnson & Johnson has its disease interception program. All of these are examples of companies doing bold things as they try to create their future. This is one that I want to dwell on for a second. Arizona State University. Now, this is an interesting university. If I said those words to people who know the US education system, there's an instant image that comes to their mind, one of two things. Either they think about American football because they've got a great American football team, or they think about a great place to go on a Friday night, because Arizona State University is legendary for its parties. Such a well-recognized party school that a publication whose name I will not mention in polite company banned it from the competition because it was making all the other schools look bad. Today, ASU is a very different place. In 2005, Michael Crow took over as president and started a bold dual transformation effort to create what he called the New American University, more notable for who it lets in than who it excludes. One plank of his platform has been a very interesting partnership with Starbucks. The goal is to have 25,000 Starbucks baristas earn an online degree from ASU by 2025. It turns out there are more people in America today who started but did not finish school than there are university graduates. Today, there are about 1,500 people who graduated from this program. There are 8,000 people currently enrolled. More than 50% of US Starbucks have at least one person in it. A bold way to use new digital technologies to reach a different market. Now, you can't just think about the moonshot. That's great, but you also have to think about what's known as the artifact trail. What are the things that will get you from here until tomorrow? If you look at Kennedy's speech, it was masterful, not just because it had that vision, but it clearly laid out the path to get there. We are going to develop the appropriate lunar spacecraft. You can't get to the moon without a lunar module. We're going to explore alternative technologies until we figure out which one works to do long lift to be able to get us to the atmosphere. And we will work on unmanned exploration. This is the first satellite that crash landed into the moon. It's not just the destination, it is the path to get there. So as you think about your own organization and you think about your strategic direction through uncertainty, don't just think about the quest. Think about the things that have to happen on the way. I can't be someone who teaches at Insight University if Insight University doesn't exist. I can't go and teach at INSEAD unless I've spent a term there as a guest lecturer and so on. This is what great strategists do. There's an inspiring vision, but there is a practical first step to begin to make it happen. And they recognize that strategy is not just what you say you do. This is a real chart from an organization. Each of the bubbles here represents a project in which they were investing. The year is the year in which the project would launch. The size of the bubble is the amount they were spending on it. Let me show you this chart in another way. This is the cumulative investment on 3 different types of projects. Now, you look like a pretty smart audience. You know nothing about this organization, the industry it's in, and so on. But look at this and tell me, what is its strategy? What is it doing? So I heard investing in growth, and how is it trying to grow? Where is it going? Not a trick question. Yes, it's going to adjacent markets. If you asked its CE what it was doing, what do you think he or she would say? Transformation. Bold transformation. That is what we were doing. That's what they were saying, but that is not what they are doing. Strategy is not what you say, it's what you actually do. One of the organizations that's done a pretty good job of driving transformation in Singapore is Singtel, the legacy telephony company. A couple years ago, it invested $2 billion, or committed to invest 2 billion Singapore dollars to go and acquire new companies to move into new spaces. It didn't just talk about transformation, it put its money where its mouth was. I asked its board chair, Simon Israel, why that amount. So this is from Dual Transformation. His response was, it was big enough that it caused people to stand up and take notice, but not so big that if we had to write all of it off, it would wreck the company. Strategy is not just what you say, strategy is what you do. And critically, what you choose not to do. The most important word in the strategy lexicon has 2 letters in it, N-O. To illustrate this point, I'm going to play a short video clip of Mark Parker, the CEO of Nike, describing some advice he got from the late, great Steve Jobs. Watch the video.
You mentioned last night when we were having dinner that when you first got the job as CEO, you got a call from Steve Jobs and he offered you some advice.
Well, he didn't call to offer me advice, but we had worked together on a Nike-Apple collaboration called Nike Plus. So we took what Apple knows, what Nike knows, and brought a new technology to the market. Anyway, long story short, he said, hey, congratulations, it's great, you're going to do a great job. I said, well, do you have any advice? And he said, no, you're great. And then there was a pause, and he goes, well, I do have some advice. He goes, Nike makes some of the best product in the world. I mean, product that you lust after, absolutely beautiful, stunning product. But you also make a lot of crap. He said, just get rid of the crappy stuff and focus on the good stuff. And then I expected a little pause and a laugh, but there was a pause but no laugh at the end. Yeah. And he was absolutely right. And in fact, that's one of my major focal points in terms of my priorities as a CEO and even as a designer when I was growing up at the company. Many ideas. Nike is an idea factory.
Just get rid of the crappy stuff and focus on the good stuff. How do you actually know which is which? The 4th and final principle I'm going to share, I will click twice, which will show 1 image and 1 video. Then I'll open it up to questions, and I've got a 90-second close, and we'll then call it a morning, at least for this portion of the program. The 4th and final principle is that the future must be discovered. You have to defeat hippos with kites. What are hippos? Hippos are one of the greatest enemies of innovation, of setting a new strategic course in the face of uncertainty. This is what Google calls the highest paid person's opinion. Some of those might be represented in the room today. You notice here what the hippo is doing. Side A has lots of data, side B has none. The hippo says option B it is. It's even worse when it comes to innovation. Both sides are often blank. The hippo often has great intuition about yesterday, not always about tomorrow. How do you defeat the hippos? Or if you are one, how do you save yourself from yourself? You fly kites. Watch this video, and then I'm happy to take any questions you have. There are two universal truths that I have learned from giving versions of some of the materials here all around the world. One is that no one ever likes to sit in the front center of the room. These are always the last seats to fill in, no matter where you go. Two, everybody thinks it's funny when human beings fall on their backside, no matter what country or culture you're from. So you get the idea here. Rather than trying to do your final version first, you start with kites and gliders. These are test markets or prototypes to work on your idea. You build wind tunnels as ways to allow you to experiment more effectively. These are models and simulations and thought experiments and talking to colleagues and looking at startups as ways to de-risk ideas early on and expedite the process of learning. I've got a few more great slides that I'm not going to show that are really fun, but I do want to pause not to talk about zombies, which are great. I just want to show this as a very simple diagnostic that you can use with your organization to see how well you do following these principles. It's available here. I added an extra S into the conference name because this demanded that I give 8 characters, so there you go. But I will pause here for any questions that you have before providing some concluding thoughts. Oh, you're taking pictures of that one. Before providing some concluding thoughts involving my family. Questions? And I'll take them from Linda. You can come and help me make sure that I get good ones from the audience, or ask me good ones yourself.
Okay,
I do have a
guys.
90-second close, so I do want 90 seconds to close out after this is done.
Is there anyone from the floor who's got a question? There was a lot there. Look, you're so shy. The kite, I like the hippo thing because I work in a law firm, so the highest paid opinion always dominates the room. But on the kites thing, it touches on a theme here, which, following on from the innovation that we saw yesterday and some of the response in the room to just the idea of disruption. Disruption is scary, right? So when you see that curious old video of people making the same mistakes and the same mistakes and the same mistakes, and then you've got the disruptor, the Wright brothers, who are looking at the problem completely differently. How do we train our brains to be the disruptors and not the people that always operate in the safe realm?
It's a great question that actually anticipates my closing. So let me give you the advice from my closing, then I can take questions, because it does allow me to. I was once told there are 3 types of questions. There are good questions that you've got a ready answer to. There are really good questions where your eyes go into the back of your head and you don't have an answer, so you start babbling to find time for it. And then there are outstanding questions that are answered by clicking and going to the next. That was a truly outstanding question, Linda. Thank you. So let me give you the canned prepared answers. I think it's really critical. This is not easy to do. Einstein once defined insanity as following the same process and expecting a different result. So the question is, how do you get good at doing the stuff I talked about here? The basic answer that I offer is that this is innate in all of us. These are my 4 children. There's Charlie, my 12-year-old, Holly, my 10-year-old, Harry, my 6-year-old, otherwise known as Captain Creative, and Teddy, my 20-month-old. The thing that they continually teach me is our natural state is being curious and creative. Of course, we then go to school and learn there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer. We go to organizations and learn there's a way to do things and a way to not do things. And we unlearn the curiosity and creativity. So what do you do to bring it back? There are 2 lessons from this game here. Has anyone done it before? The marshmallow challenge? This is not when you put a marshmallow in front of a kid to tease them and see how long they can wait. So this is, you get these pieces of equipment, you've got 18 minutes, you build the biggest tower you can with the marshmallow on top. It's been done all around the world, and there's a group of people that it's been shown repeatedly do this task poorly. I'll give you a hint, they have a particular type of degree. What type of degree is it? Business degree, that's correct. Engineers, no, engineers are good, architects are good. But people with MBAs do this poorly. I've seen it with my own eyes. The clock is ticking. The first 6 minutes are establishing dominance. Who will lead the group? The next 6 minutes are planning. The next 5 minutes and 53 seconds is execution. Marshmallow goes on top. The whole structure collapses. Who does this really well in contrast? Give you a hint, it was on the last page. Kids, that's correct. There's Holly when she was in grade 1 doing it. You could see the teacher perverted the challenge, infinite marshmallows, worried the kids would eat it, and that would be it. It's innate in all of us. You have to put yourself in a context where you don't know the answer. Ask yourself the question, when was the last time you did something for the first time? That's what you got to do to retrain your brain to remember what it's like to innovate like a kid. That might be doing something new at your organization, giving a go at something you haven't done before there, or learning a new language or new skill or new musical instrument or whatever outside. Second interesting finding. If I got all of you, all the CEs in the room together and had you do it, you'd do okay. You would beat the MBAs, but you would still lose to the kids. If I wanted you to beat the kids, I'd have to pair you up with your executive admins. Time-tested innovation principle, magic happens at intersections, when different mindsets and skills collide. So a simple tip that you can do to retrain and rewire your brain is to go and find an alien. Aliens exist inside every organization. They're the people who make weird comments in your organization, the people who eat lunch alone, the people who are shunned. Give the aliens in your organization a big fat hug, because they will lead you in a new direction when times of disruption strike. So that is my canned response. That was slightly longer than 90 seconds, but there you go.
It's challenging though, isn't it? Because in fact, all of those things are asking us not to behave in the way that we normally behave.
Correct.
I mean, there's a
And-
reason that the aliens in any organisation sit in the lunchroom alone, and that is because they generally haven't been embraced by the rest of the team for one way or another. They are the outsiders.
Absolutely. And this again goes back to the idea of future back thinking. If you take a future back perspective and you imagine your organization in 5, 7, or 10 years, and you say, you know what, the world's going to look exactly like it does now. Nothing's going to change. Behaviors aren't going to change. Desires aren't going to change. Technologies aren't going to change. Ignore everything that I've talked about and just keep doing exactly what you're doing. I don't think that's the reality for many of you. We are in a world where technologies are changing at exponential rates and so on. So you are going to have to do something different. One of my old clients at Procter & Gamble, Dave Goulet, he just had one line that I'll never forget. It's very simple but important. The Dave Goulet innovation principle, if you want to do something different, ready for it? You have to do something different.
Lastly, last question. The challenge for this sector, I think, and it's an inherent tension in all of the things that we've been talking about today and later, yesterday and later today, is that getting kids in particular to participate in sport, which is really important to the people in this room, there is an element of nostalgia about that. I mean, in a way, what we want young people to do is what we did when we were children. Yes, we want to do it differently. Yes, we've got other ideas about how to do it. But at its very core, it's about getting kids onto the paddock as often as possible, running around, hitting a ball, batting a ball, whatever the sport is. So what you're asking them to think about is disruption at the same time as they're trying to hold on to some really key traditional values.
And this is why I think the idea of dual transformation can be a very useful frame, because it can say, look, we've got a core set of things that we do that we want to make more resilient. So we will find ways to where we need to embrace digital technologies to communicate with people, where we need to embrace new ways of operating, we will do that. But we can retain the nostalgia there while we concurrently go and think about the new stuff that we're going to do that might reframe how we think about sport, how we think about participation, what it really means. Connecting all of this should be a core purpose, a core reason for what we're doing. And if you get that right, you often find that we are nostalgic for the methods, but we can relax the methods and still deliver against the purpose of participation, the purpose of community, the purpose of engagement. That can happen in lots of different ways. And in fact, I think the fundamental mistake that many people make is when they hear the word disruption, they get scared. It is a kind of scary word, right? You think about technologies, we think about failure stories, your mouth even contorts when you say it. But if you study disruptive change, always it leads to net growth in markets. Simple example. The idea of digital photography has been around since 1975. It was invented by Kodak. Kodak, of course, ultimately fails. It goes bankrupt. Do you take more or fewer pictures than you did after Kodak went bankrupt? If you're like everybody else in the world, you take many more pictures than you ever did before, because the simplifying, disruptive, democratizing technologies make it accessible for the entire world. Now, what you do with them and how you use them and how you communicate has fundamentally changed, but photography has been a growth industry. Journalism has been a growth industry. Every industry that's been disrupted has been a growth industry. The players have changed because people haven't changed their mindset, but that is not the necessary outcome. We can embrace it as well.
Fantastic. It's been a really stimulating presentation and a great way to start the day. I'd just ask one of the team to come up and give you the formal thank you.
That's my bobblehead. So I'll leave you with that image as I get the formal thank you. That's Skoda, my head on Yoda's body.
Kia ora. Koe Colin Waterson tōku ingoa. It is my privilege on behalf of Sport New Zealand to to thank you, Scott, for sharing your wealth of experiences and knowledge with us today. Nō reira, tēnei te mihi ki a koe, ānei rā he whakaro aroha mō. Would you please accept this small gift as a token of our appreciation?